Well, you're most of the way there now. You've done well. The format requirements. Yeah, there should be a cover. You need to submit it through Turnitin to make sure the Turnitin number's on it. There's guidance on the middle page, so I'd advise just checking through that.
Okay.
Most of the formatting as you had it was okay. 1.5 or double spacing usually as well, I'd recommend. But you're mostly there. You were fine for length as well after staying out. Yeah, you've got a bit of bibliography in there. So one thing I would say is when you're redrafting this, is watch out for very long paragraphs. And there's some paragraphs that are 1,000 words, and I'd say as a general rule, 400, no more than 400. If it's more than that, just split it into a 200-word paragraph's a lot easier to read than a 600-word one, and it just clarifies your argument when you do that. I think it just makes the points a lot more concisely. Aside from that, there was a couple of things that I wanted to flag up to you. I thought overall this was good, and the redraft, what you've done since I last read it is you've explained your choices much more clearly, and I think that's a real strength. It's much better than it was before from that perspective. I think in the introduction you discussed the importance of FDI to electronics value chains. That's fine, that makes sense. I worry about overplaying that in the sense that electronics value chains also involve a lot of outsourcing. So I think you just need to just think about how you're phrasing that. It's not that you're wrong to discuss FDI, it's just the whole principle of a value chain is obviously that all, in terms of what you're looking at, is that not all production takes place within a company, it takes place across boundaries. So not a huge problem, I think you can do that. It's just a case of phrasing there. It's not like a problem with what you've done. You also say a few times that the existing literature hasn't looked at electronics value chains, but then you refer to literature that has. I just take that out. Like, there is literature on electronics value chains, and you know that, you've written about it. So I think that just, it's not helping you to have that there. Does that make sense? I think the most substantial question I had, the biggest problem with what you've done in the findings and the discussion section, is this thing about cobalt. You say several times that this is about COVID, but the data you've got doesn't look like that at all. Cobalt exports have fallen quite dramatically since 2015 to 16, and most of that decline had already happened before COVID hit. And I assume that electronics providers have either found substitute materials or other supplies of cobalt, because electronics production didn't stop between 2015 and 2019. I think you need to relook at that. Like that's the biggest problem in what you've said. And if the story there is that alternatives have been found, then just write that in. It doesn't look to me as if declining cobalt exports from the Congo are stopping production. That doesn't add up with the rest of the data that you've got. In the conclusion, you make a few claims about cooperation in technological development. I just think you need to make sure that what you've said in the case studies actually supports that. So just draw that out a lot more clearly. Maybe spend a bit more time explaining what these case studies tell you about that in the findings section before you discuss that in the later sections. Okay, well that's fine. Email me if you have any questions. I think you're doing well. You've got this to a good stage. You've got a bit of time to make those changes, but I think it will be a substantially better piece of work if you can respond to those comments. And I think in particular you need to think carefully about this Cobalt story. I'm not sure it's fitting with what you've got at the moment, and you could just take it out. It's up to you. I mean, you don't need that there necessarily. If you could even include it and say, look, the companies have actually worked around this. Like, raw materials access isn't a problem. It wasn't the problem. The problem was that COVID disrupted production and transport, which seems to, that seems to be what happened. That's the story you've told. So you could say that, I think. Okay, well, email me if you have any questions. How many references do you need? You've got enough. I wouldn't worry about that. I think you're okay for that.